Years ago, she pulled a wild Mustang colt from a burning forest, then disappeared from his world. Now, deep in the snow-covered mountains, that same woman is buried beneath a blizzard's fury, alone and fading. But fate isn't done with her yet. Because somewhere in that same valley, a stallion lifts his head and remembers. What he does next, the world will never forget. The road was vanishing beneath her tires, first asphalt, then gravel, then just hard-packed dirt, barely clinging to the edge of the Montana wilderness. They'd named the wildfire Hawk's Tooth, and for good reason. It tore through the forest like a jagged blade, leaving blackened scars across everything it touched. Smoke clung low over the trees, a suffocating blanket of burnt pine and scorched earth. Sergeant Rachel Maddox, 27 years old and 6 days into her first real leave in years, gripped the wheel of the Forest Service truck with knuckles gone white. She hadn't planned on this. The idea was solitude, some peace after the deployment, after the decisions that still replayed in her head at night. But that morning, when she'd seen the glow cresting the horizon like a second sunrise, something pulled her toward it. Not fear, not even curiosity, just that gut-deep sense, the one the Army taught her to trust. She passed a command checkpoint at the ridge. A firefighter in ash-covered gear stepped into the road, waving her off. "No entry beyond this point. We've got hot zones flanking both sides." Rachel didn't argue. She gave a tight nod, shifted into reverse, then backed up just far enough to turn off onto an old utility path half covered in brush. No signs, no markers, just memory. She'd trained in these woods back in ROTC. She knew they led east, toward the old cattle fencing that used to border the federal land, toward the burn zone. The further in she drove, the quieter it got. No birds, no bugs, just the low drone of distant flame and the eerie creak of trees dying on their feet. 2 miles in, the path disintegrated into rubble. She killed the engine, left the keys in the ignition, and stepped out. Her boots crunched on a layer of soot that had settled like powder. She tied a bandana across her face, adjusted her sidearm, and moved forward on instinct alone. Then came the sound. A scream. Not human. Not quite. Shrill, sharp, and cutting through the smoke like a blade. A horse's cry, but high-pitched, panicked, wounded. She turned toward it. 50 yards in, the trees opened into a clearing ringed with fire. Flames crackled at the edges, hungry and fast. In the middle, tangled in rusted barbed wire, was a foal. A wild Mustang, barely a few months old, its gray coat slick with sweat and soot. It thrashed, eyes rolling back, legs scraping the ground as the metal dug into its flank and shoulder. Rachel froze. Everything else, the heat, the smoke, the press of her own heartbeat, faded to background. Training kicked in. Not combat training, human training. She moved slow, hands out. "Hey, hey, easy," she said, voice low, barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." The foal snorted, jerking hard enough to slice deeper. Blood streaked its legs. The barbed wire, looped around an old fence post half buried in the dirt, was biting deeper each time it moved. Rachel circled, pulled the multi-tool from her belt. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept them locked on the wire, not the fire creeping closer behind her. The flames were minutes away now. Maybe less. She dropped to her knees. The wire was old, brittle, but still strong. She didn't bother with finesse, just dug in and cut, tearing at loops, ignoring the sting of metal slicing her gloves. One strand gave, then another. The third was embedded so deep it took skin with it when she freed it. The foal flinched, kicked once, then stilled. One more pull, The wire gave, and just like that, it was free. The foal didn't run, not right away. It looked at her, locked eyes, not just fear, not just animal instinct, something else, something still. For a moment, Rachel felt like the two of them were the only living things left on the mountain. Then it turned and bolted, disappearing into the smoke with a burst of ash behind it. Rachel exhaled, finally, and let herself fall back into the dirt. Her chest heaved, her hands bled, her lungs burned. But in that second, lying there in the clearing while the fire roared closer, she didn't feel broken. She felt anchored. She left without a word. No radio call, no report, no witness. Just a memory she carried with her. One she never told anyone about. And somewhere out in those mountains, a young Mustang lived because of her. 12 years later, the same mountains, same cold, but everything else had changed. Rachel Maddox no longer wore a uniform. Her medals, what few she kept, sat in a drawer, untouched. The others she'd given away, some to families, some to strangers, some she simply left behind in places she couldn't remember. She didn't talk about the last tour. No one asked, not anymore. When she reached the cabin, an old ranger structure she'd leased for the season, she didn't unpack right away. She just stood on the porch, breathing in the cold. The air burned clean, edged with the dry scent of pine and snow. A pair of ravens watched her from the trees like sentinels. She wasn't here to heal. She hated that word. She was here to be quiet, to disappear for a while, maybe forever. The cabin sat 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by ridgelines and forest so dense that GPS occasionally hiccuped. That's how she liked it. There was a wood-burning stove, a manual pump for water, and enough dried food to last 3 months. No internet, no cell signal, no roads open from December through March. On paper, it was a survivalist's dream. In truth, it was her last exit. The blizzard came early. Forecasts had called for light snow. Instead, a full-blown whiteout punched through the valley like a wrecking ball, swallowing visibility by mid-afternoon. Trees groaned under the weight of ice. Winds screamed through the canyons. Her cabin shuddered with each gust like it was exhaling old breath. By the second night, her firewood pile was halfway gone. By the third, her radio was nothing but static. She tried not to panic. She'd been trained for worse. But on the 5th day, when the stove sputtered and the last of the pine logs turned to ember, she knew she had to make a call. The woodshed was down the slope, maybe 50 yards. Nothing in Montana should be 50 yards when you can't see past 5. She layered up. Base thermal, flannel, parka. Slipped her hunting knife into her boot out of habit. Laced her combat boots tight. Tied a scarf around her face and stepped out into the storm like she was entering another country. Visibility was 0. The world was made of snow and sound. Wind slamming through branches, her own boots crunching against a crust of ice, her breath coming faster than she wanted to admit. She took the slope slowly, step by step. Halfway down, the ice gave out. No warning, no time to catch herself. The slope she trusted fractured beneath her, and suddenly she was sliding, backwards, sideways, hands flailing for something, anything. But there was nothing. Just smooth, hard snow, and a pull of gravity that didn't let go. She hit the ravine wall hard. Her right shoulder cracked against a buried tree root, and the air flew from her lungs in a burst. She came to a stop in a drift 6 feet deep. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Couldn't. Snow was in her mouth, her ears, packed into the collar of her coat. Her legs were twisted at a strange angle beneath her. She tried to pull them free and screamed. A sharp, brutal pain lanced through her hip. She lay still after that. The snow started falling harder. She wasn't going anywhere. She had maybe 30 minutes of real body heat left. an hour if she focused. But her hands were already going numb. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Not from injury, from exhaustion. Cold sleep. And she knew what that meant. Still, she wasn't scared. Not really. Just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of remembering. As the wind roared overhead and snow began to seal her in, she did what no one who'd served beside her had ever seen her do. She closed her eyes and let go. The sky over the basin was a sheet of bruised steel, thick with the weight of lingering snow. The wind had changed hours ago, shifting southeast and bringing colder air, sharper, drier, with the sting of distant ice in its teeth. The herd felt it first through their hooves, vibrations in the ground, the silence of birds gone mute. Instincts took over. They began moving at dawn. 24 wild Mustangs picked their way through the frozen terrain with methodical caution. Their bodies were half-dusted in frost, manes clumped and tangled, tails snapping in the wind. This part of the valley, near the old irrigation flats and ghost fence line, wasn't their usual path, but their leader had chosen it. Ashmark, a stallion whose name no human had ever spoken aloud, but whom ranchers still told stories about, always with reverence, sometimes with fear. 17 hands high, scarred from old fights, and fiercely intelligent. Gray with dark eyes that didn't blink much. He didn't just lead the herd, he controlled its flow, like a river does stone. Even the mares with foals let him pass first. That morning, he was agitated, not visibly, not to the untrained eye, but every motion was just a bit sharper. Every pause lasted a fraction longer. His ears flicked more often, nose to the wind more frequently. He hadn't eaten since sunrise, nor had he let the herd stop to drink at the partially frozen creek. His pace was faster, determined, focused. Then, around 9:00 a.m., just as they rounded a snow-choked ridge that overlooked the ravine mouth, he stopped. Dead still. One hoof lifted, hanging mid-step. The herd bunched behind him, snorting, restless, unsure. Ashmark lifted his head, neck tall and rigid. His nostrils flared wide. He breathed in, deeply, slowly. Then again, and again. There was something in the air. Not prey, not predator, something heavier, human, but not recent, not active, something faded, stressed, buried beneath layers of cold and time and silence. His entire posture changed. Ashmark turned his head slightly, his ears locking forward, and then without warning broke into a fast, downhill trot that evolved into a canter, then a dead sprint. His muscles moved like coiled rope unraveling at full force, tail whipping behind him in the wind, eyes locked ahead. The herd startled, some spooked, but when he didn't stop, the rest followed. First the young stallions, then the mares, then the slowest, the cautious, the colts. They fell into line not out of understanding, but submission. Trust. He had never led them into fire. Ashmark ran. He didn't know why. He only knew where. It wasn't memory in the human sense, not thought, not words. It was imprint, a scent stored in bone, the echo of a voice that had once said nothing and everything all at once. Years ago, in fire, pain, blood, then freedom, and stillness. Now he smelled that same essence, faded but pure, under layers of snow. He galloped down the incline toward the bend in the ravine where the snow deepened. Each stride threw up arcs of powder. His hooves cracked through ice with every push, leaving deep gouges in the surface. Steam curled from his nostrils with each exhale, breath heavier now but unwavering. At the bottom, he stopped. The wind had shifted again. He turned into it, took 3 steps left, then dropped his head low to the ground and snorted hard. There, beneath 2 feet of wind-packed snow, something alive. He pawed once, then again. Faster now, urgently, not wildly, but with purpose. Each strike of his hoof sent snow flying in bursts. The herd arrived moments later, circling behind, confused but silent, watching him dig. Ashmark didn't look up, didn't hesitate. He began to nick, that high-pitched, sharp half-whinny reserved only for distress or warning. Then again, and again. The others shifted uneasily. They had never heard him sound like this. But still, he stayed. The wind howled through the basin like a scream. Snow whipped across the drifted ground. Somewhere beneath that white blanket, a heartbeat slowed. Ashmark wouldn't leave. Not yet. Not until someone else came. Not until someone saw what he did. Not until the debt was paid. The snow had muffled everything. No birds. No distant groan of trees under weight. No wind. Only the heavy silence of a mountain holding its breath. Beneath 2 feet of it, Rachel Maddox lay broken. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her heart beat slow, erratic. Her breath came in shallow drags, lips crusted with frost. The fall had knocked her unconscious. But it wasn't the impact that would kill her. It was time. And temperature. Somewhere inside her jacket, beneath layers of thermal, her core was still warm enough to register life. Barely. But her extremities were gone. Numb, motionless. Her gloves were crusted with frozen blood from the rocks she'd hit on the way down. Her right leg was twisted at a sick angle, pinned under a slab of snow-packed ice. Her scarf had slipped down, letting the cold inside her collar. But her eyes, half-lidded, ice-ringed, trembled. She was still in there, trapped, fading. Above her, just a few feet up the slope, the snow churned. A thud, then another, then a sharp scrape, followed by a blow strong enough to shake the top layer loose. Sunlight, filtered by the clouds, caught the floating particles like diamonds. Ashmark's hoof punched through again. He pawed, scraped, kicked, not randomly, but with intense precision. His breath came hard now, lungs pumping white steam into the air like an old engine. His chest heaved. His eyes never wavered. He knew she was there. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself. He just knew. With each strike, more snow came free. Then, finally, something solid. Fabric. Then flesh. Ashmark stopped, snorted. His ears locked forward, then flattened. He stepped back, not in fear, but reverence. Then he bellowed, a wild guttural sound, more roar than whinny. It echoed off the ridges like a signal flare. The herd behind him shifted uneasily, crowding closer now. One of the younger mares pawed the snow beside him, mimicking. Another whinnied low. But Ashmark held position. He stepped forward again and lowered his head slowly, exhaling against the body. Warmth. Faint. He stayed like that. Silent. Still. Guarding. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. The snow had started again. Small flakes drifting in waves. Light at first, but persistent. Ashmark didn't move. He stood sentinel. The herd began to drift away, circling the ravine edge, uncertain. But not their leader. He remained, motionless but alert, eyes on the trees, ears twitching at each distant sound. Then, movement. Far off. Engine noise. Subtle, high-pitched. Snowmobiles. Ashmark turned toward the sound, but didn't flee, didn't flinch. Instead, he took 2 slow steps to the side, positioning himself beside the body, between her and whatever came next, not to shield her, to present her. He had brought her back to the world. Now it was up to the world to take her. It started as a dare. Jamie Tucker, 16, had convinced his cousin Leo to take the older Polaris sleds up through the north side of the valley. Snow had finally packed deep enough to cruise smooth, and school was out for the blizzard. Cabin fever and bad judgment go hand in hand. They left around 8:00 a.m., backpacks stuffed with jerky, gas canisters, and a GoPro. Jamie duct-taped to the front bar. They weren't supposed to go past the Elk Run checkpoint. Naturally, they did. The basin was breathtaking in that winter silent kind of way, an endless stretch of clean white hills framed by black pine and iron-gray sky. The boys raced each other down ridgelines, carving figure 8s through open clearings, throwing rooster tails of powder 10 feet high. Around noon, they stopped near the edge of the ravine. Leo killed his engine first, helmet fogged with breath. "You hear that?" he asked, lifting the visor. Jamie pulled his gloves off, listening. Nothing. Just wind. "No," he said. "Why?" "I don't know. Thought I heard." Then it came again. A sound that didn't belong, sharp, metallic, rhythmic, a thump, then a pause, then again, harder, followed by a deep, echoing snort. The boys looked at each other. Jamie pointed toward the ravine. They followed the noise on foot, boots sinking into thigh-deep snow until they reached the lip of the basin, and froze. Standing dead center, beside a churned-up pit of half-dug snow, was a massive gray Mustang, alone, unmoving, eyes locked on them. Leo inhaled sharply. "Dude." Jamie held out a hand. "Don't move." Ashmark didn't flinch, didn't bolt. He just watched. Below him, barely visible beneath the snow, was something human. A parka sleeve, a gloved hand, a woman's face, half covered in frost. "Oh my God," Jamie whispered. They scrambled down without thinking, cautious, slow. Ashmark backed away 2 steps, just far enough to let them near, but close enough to keep watch. Leo dropped to his knees. "She's alive. I can feel breath. It's shallow, but it's there." Jamie fumbled for his phone. No signal. He ran back up to the sleds, ripped open the emergency beacon case, and punched the SOS. Red light. Flashing. Then he waited. Ashmark stayed beside Leo. Not threatening, not tame, just present. Leo tried to speak. Did you dig her out?" Ashmark blinked. Ears twitched. He let the boy get closer. "You're not supposed to be here either, huh?" Leo whispered. Snow began falling again. The beacon continued to pulse. Minutes passed. Then, distant hum. A helicopter. Then another. 2 snowmobiles with red strobes crested the far ridge. Jamie jumped and waved his arms. Ashmark snorted, loud, then stepped back from the woman. As the first responder reached the basin floor, the stallion turned his head, gave one last look at the boys, and walked away. He disappeared into the trees without a sound. The medic dropped to his knees beside the woman. "She's alive. We got a pulse." "Who found her?" another called. Jamie pointed at the trees. Leo just said, "A horse." The rescuers didn't understand. Not yet. But the world would. The thudding of helicopter blades shattered the stillness like an explosion buried in wind. Jamie and Leo stood wide-eyed on the ridge, jackets flapping, snow blasting across their faces as the medevac came in low from the north. The chopper hovered briefly, nose into the wind, then dipped and touched down at the edge of the basin in a flurry of rotor wash. Seconds later, 4 medics disembarked with practiced urgency, ducking low and hauling a collapsible stretcher and trauma pack. Clara Hines, a veteran paramedic who'd once worked battlefield triage in Kandahar, took point. As soon as she spotted the woman's body partially dug from the snow, she moved faster. "Pulse check. Expose the face. Get that oxygen on now," she barked. Her team flanked Rachel Maddox like clockwork. Thermal wraps were tucked into the armpits and groin. A portable oxygen mask was strapped on. Her frozen leg, bent unnaturally under her torso, was gently immobilized with a carbon fiber splint. Rachel's vitals were faint. A weak radial pulse, core temperature dangerously low, breathing shallow and irregular. Skin waxy and pale, but not yet the porcelain white of death. Still alive, but in critical hypothermia. Clara leaned close, brushing snow from Rachel's eyelashes, studying the bluish tinge of her lips. "Stage 2, borderline 3, she muttered. "She's right at the edge." Behind them, the basin was a canvas of confusion. Hoofprints, dozens, deep, deliberate, all surrounding the hole where the boys had found her. Not random trampling. This was purposeful movement. A circular pattern, protective, almost territorial. Clara had seen plenty of rescue sites. She'd never seen anything like this. She turned toward the boys. "You two found her?" Leo answered, voice rough. "No, he did." Clara squinted. "Who?" Jamie's voice was quieter now. "The horse. The big one. Gray." Clara looked between them. "A domestic horse?" "No," Leo said. "Wild. He dug her out. Waited with her. Wouldn't leave until we showed up." Clara didn't answer. She glanced back at the hoof prints, then at the partially recovered spot where Rachel had been buried. Something about the way the snow had been disturbed. It wasn't panicked. It was focused. She could see where the stallion had stood still for long stretches, as if guarding. His pacing wasn't erratic. It was methodical, tight circles centered on her body. "How long was he there?" Jamie shrugged. "Long enough for the wind to cover his tracks. He didn't flinch when we got close. He just watched us." "He watched us like he was waiting," Leo added, "like he knew someone had to come." The medics exchanged looks, but no one laughed. The stretcher was secured. Rachel's core was stabilized enough for transport. The moment they lifted her, she groaned. Low, muffled, her head lolled slightly, lips barely moving beneath the oxygen mask. A pulse oximeter clipped to her finger blinked erratically but rising. "She's fighting," Clara said. "Let's move." The boys helped carry gear back to the sleds as the stretcher team loaded Rachel into the helicopter. Before sealing the doors, Clara took one last look around the basin. It was eerily quiet again. The herd had vanished into the trees. No sign of the stallion. Just silence and the soft whisper of fresh snow falling over what he'd done. The chopper lifted, spraying snow across the ridge, rotors screaming against the gray sky as it peeled upward and banked north. Inside, the trauma team monitored vitals. Rachel's core temp was climbing slowly, her heart rate stabilizing, fingers twitching. She would live. Below, in the clearing where snow still bore the memory of hooves, the boys stood silently with the medics. None of them said it aloud, but they all knew something beyond protocol had happened out here. Something primal. Something that didn't make sense, and yet made all the sense in the world. 3 days passed before Rachel Maddox opened her eyes. She came out of sedation slowly, like surfacing from the bottom of a cold lake. Sounds reached her first. Muffled tones, the rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the faint mechanical beep of a heart monitor. Her body felt distant, as though she inhabited only the space behind her eyelids. Even blinking required effort. The ceiling was unfamiliar,
white, sterile, humming faintly with fluorescent light. She tried to move and couldn't. Everything was stiff. Her limbs felt weighted, wrapped in heat packs and medical tubing. The IV in her arm tugged slightly. Her leg was immobilized in a padded brace. Her throat was dry, but her lips managed to form words. "A horse," she whispered. The nurse beside her, leaning over to adjust her vitals, froze mid-motion. "I'm sorry?" the woman said gently. Rachel's eyes opened fully now. "There was a horse." The nurse offered a small smile. "We'll come back to that. You're safe. You're in Missoula General. You've been out for 72 hours. You were found with hypothermia, a fractured femur, and a dislocated shoulder." Rachel nodded faintly, then blinked. "The ravine?" "Yes. You were found half buried in snow. 2 boys on snowmobiles saw a wild horse acting strangely, digging. That's how they knew where to look." Rachel frowned, the fog in her mind beginning to clear. "He didn't leave. Not until they arrived." So they said. Later that day, a doctor confirmed her survival was borderline miraculous. Her core body temperature had dropped to 85.2 degrees Celsius. Any longer, and she likely wouldn't have made it. What they couldn't explain, what none of them could, was how her body had remained just warm enough to sustain vital function. One nurse joked it was divine intervention. Another said it must have been animal body heat. Everyone was guessing. Then the video surfaced. Jamie's GoPro footage, posted quietly to a YouTube account and picked up by a local outlet, went viral within hours. The clip showed a massive gray stallion pacing beside a shallow snow pit, glancing repeatedly toward the ridge. His body language was unmistakable, nervous, alert, and yet oddly deliberate. The footage was grainy but powerful. He stepped over Rachel's legs more than once, careful not to crush her. At one point, he snorted and stood perfectly still above her, ears twitching at the sound of snowmobiles. Then, without prompting, he backed away and vanished into the trees just before the medics arrived. Comments exploded. "This horse saved her. Real-life spirit animal. Wild Mustangs are smarter than people think," animal behaviorists chimed in. Theories ranged from basic herd instinct to scent memory to deep patterning, a term one ethologist used to describe animal responses to trauma-linked individuals. But most people didn't want explanations. They wanted the story, the former Marine, the mysterious stallion, the blizzard, the unspoken bond. News crews requested interviews. Podcasts begged for exclusives. Wildlife photographers descended on the basin hoping to catch sight of the stallion. No one did. Rachel declined interviews. She stayed in the hospital for 12 days, enduring physical therapy, warming protocols, and bone realignment procedures. But she kept a quiet strength. She didn't want spectacle. She didn't want headlines. Still, she asked one favor of the nurses. When she was finally wheeled into a recovery room with a view, she placed a single framed photo on the windowsill, a still from the video Jamie had sent her, the moment just before Ashmark disappeared. A blurry shot, snow swirling. The stallion half turned, ears up, like he knew he was being remembered. Rachel stared at that photo for a long time, silent, unmoving. And then, so quietly that no one else heard, she whispered, "I remembered you too." 3 weeks after her release from the hospital, Rachel Maddox returned to the mountains. Not to the cabin. That had been hauled out by the leaseholder's staff. Broken window panes, warped floorboards from snowmelt, and the collapsed woodshed left half buried. It was no longer a place to hide, and it wasn't a place to heal either. But the mountains themselves, those she still trusted, they didn't ask anything. They didn't speak. And they didn't forget. She stayed in a ranger lodge for 2 nights, hiking short distances on crutches,
not saying much to the local staff who recognized her but didn't pry. She was the woman from the video, the soldier, the survivor, the one the horse stood over like a guardian. Everyone knew the story now. Everyone had questions. She didn't have answers. It snowed again the second night. Quiet, steady, untouched. The kind of snowfall that made the world feel paused. The next morning, a drone operated by a wildlife tracker caught an image just as the sun cut through a break in the clouds. The man, Logan Bryant, a conservationist doing an aerial survey, didn't realize what he'd seen until he downloaded the footage that evening. There he was, standing alone on a ridge overlooking the same ravine where the rescue had happened. Ashmark, the gray stallion, still, silent, upright. He was facing east, into the wind, just like the morning he had first scented her under the snow. His body framed by drifts of untouched white, his posture tall and balanced, not grazing, not fleeing, just looking, waiting. The photograph, when zoomed and cleaned up, was stunning. It wasn't posed. It wasn't perfect. It was a candid portrait of something timeless, something beyond nature documentaries and viral videos. It was reverence, solitude, and memory pressed into a single frozen frame. Rachel received the photo in an email with the subject line, "I think he came back." She printed it that same day. No filters, no cropping, just the stallion, the snow, and the ridge. She framed it in matte black and set it beside her bed, angled just so, where the sunrise would catch it each morning. Sometimes she would wake in the dark before the world stirred and look over at it. She would study his shape, the slope of his shoulder, the way the snow curled around his hooves without touching them. And she would think of that moment, 12 years ago in the fire, when he'd looked at her and not run. She would think of his breath warming her skin when the rest of the world had forgotten her beneath the snow. And she would whisper, not needing anyone to hear it, "You remembered." And in the silence that followed, she felt something deeper than speech, a bond not built on language, but on something older, something not lost in the wilderness, but born there,